Hi, I'm Cindy Cash, Principal of Ray White North Richmond, and I'm here today with Troy Meyers from the Urban City Group. Welcome, Troy.
Thanks for having me.
I'm very privileged to have Troy with us today. We're planning to do a series of podcasts, basically in relation to things that we think that matter to people who are looking to sell their family home. Obviously, there's a lot of rules and regulations every day that we have to live by, and there's nothing more important than your home. Selling a home is stressful enough, and the last thing that you want is some complications to arise at the point of sale. So we're trying to provide some information that might be helpful to people to avoid these sorts of pitfalls. So in real estate, we see these things every day. And we do, try to sort of get as much information at the beginning when we're signing up a vendor to find out whether or not their property has a occupation certificate, for example. A couple of things that we found recently was a new build, 5 years down the track, built with McDonald Jones. The vendor thought, everything was done, hands over the paperwork, and then we go to sell the property and he realises that there was never a final occupation certificate. Another one is a substantial extension renovation that somebody did, all with council approval, all done professionally with builders. Years go by and they get to the point of sale and realise that there was no final occupation certificate. So going forward, what should people do in these situations?
First thing is don't panic, because we'll try and help as best we can, but there are difficulties. Obviously, for us, there's always a concern about, insurance issues and what's happened with this building over that period of time. There's a lot of documentation that we need to be able to issue an occupation certificate. And I think people just think that, and we experience it all the time, they got this, this excitement about getting into their new house. They get there, the last inspection we usually see them at is wet area inspection, and then that they move in because they have to, and and then life goes on. And what happens is you get the phone call and go, hey, I'm settling next week. Can I get my occupation certificate? And you go, probably not.
Yeah.
And so then, we go through this process of having to go back and familiarise ourselves with the project and work out what information they need. And sometimes there's and the information these days, it's a lot. And the legalities around an OC for the certifier, the home buyer, and everybody else are huge. Everyone would have heard about insurance issues that we have. So, if you haven't got the OC, I think, well, then basically you're not going to get a contract to sale. You're generally not going to sell your house, and that's a major concern. So sometimes these things can take weeks or months. And it's not a comfortable situation that we really like to be in. We'd rather people, when they finish their dwelling, push on, get the OC, and then life's good, because nobody knows what happens when life's happening. People pass away, people get divorced, people, all these, and you don't want to leave those issues and burden your family. So getting an OC. It's almost like donating a kidney.
That's a good analogy.
Sometimes. So that's how it feels anyway. So we usually have to, first thing we have to do is we go out and do an inspection, make sure everything's okay, and then that's the easy bit. The hard bit is then getting the documentation. So that can be wide and varied. That could be, getting pest certificates, that could be getting engineer certificates, that could be, getting the bushfire consultant out there, and hopefully those people are all still around.
Well, that's another thing. I think dispelling a myth that I seem to come up with a lot is that after 7 years, we don't need to worry about it anymore because it doesn't matter. But I think they confuse that with the builder's warranty, which is usually for 7 years. Would that be correct?
Yeah, that's right. I could write a book on the myths that are around, and if I stand on one leg and I turn around clockwise, then, all my termites will get out of the house. It is a myth. That it may be so for the builder with their practical completion, that their 7 years defects liability is finished. But for the certifier, it doesn't finish until we issue the occupation certificate. And you have to be aware that when you sign up with a certifier, there's a service agreement that we have to sign with our clients and our applicants. And we have strict terms in those agreements for good reason. So what people probably don't know is that our insurance has to run on once we've issued the occupation certificate for 10 years. So if you've already been in the house for 5 or 10 years, and we have to then issue the occupation certificate, so that certificate's got to warrant that building for another 10 years. So effectively, you're insuring the building for 20 years. It's not ideal, and usually there'll be additional charges for that, for us to be able to pay those insurance premiums, because they're quite substantial.
So basically the time, it never stops. Like, it doesn't just get to a point where you don't have to worry about it anymore.
No.
Which I think is what some people seem to think. And I guess the other thing is, I mean, you're obviously still here in business. And so if somebody has used you to certify their property and they contact you, you can assist them, albeit with complications and a lot of paperwork and expense. But what if your certifier is not there anymore? What if they've gone out of business? What if your builder's gone broke? What do you do then?
It just adds another level of complexity, and it has happened on occasion. I'll just address those individually. So if your certifier is not around anymore, whether he's been deregistered or he's retired, there's the ability to transfer to another certifier, or back to council. It's not usually a preferred situation for other certifiers to take on work from people who've already, how do I explain that? In terms of taking on some other certifier's work, it's not always ideal. And people think that the certifier is only going to be responsible from that point when they're engaged to the occupation certificate. But in reality, the certifier is responsible for everything. So if we decide to take on another certifier's job to be able to assist in issuing an occupation certificate, well, then we're taking on the responsibility all the way from when that job started. All the inspections,
a lot, isn't it? You've not even had anything to do with any of that. So you're trusting that it was all done correctly and you're taking responsibility.
We don't trust. So in reality, that's a lot of the complication is we have to go back and go, okay, were all the inspections done? Can we have a look at the inspection reports? Was the approval issued right in the first place? So before we even take this on, there's this little time period there where we've got to decide whether we want to take it on, and that's reviewing documents, checking inspection reports that were done, checking installation certificates. So, and all that time costs work. Time costs money, and we've got to be able to allow for that. So that's part of the complication. More often than not, we've been in the area for over 20 years now. We know the area. If we can assist people, we will. We have taken on these type of jobs before. But if we were worried about it and we couldn't, then we'd probably we would assist the client to lodge an application with the council, because unfortunately for the council, they can't refuse not to take it. They're in that unfortunate position. But yeah, look, there's a lot at play, and there's a lot to think about. I'm sorry, what was the other question you had?
Oh, look, it's just talking about, how do you do a retrospective, if the builder was no longer available and the certifier was no longer available.
Yes.
So relating to a builder, one of my examples was McDonald Jones. They're still in business. But what if there was a company that was not in business anymore? Like, how do you go back and get all of the approvals and all the paperwork if you've built a project home?
Sometimes you can't. So, usually when businesses wind up, the records go as well. And that's a real problem, because either you have to be able to prove to the certifier the standard of work that's been done. And if you haven't got the installation certificates, well, then you've got to then maybe bring in other experts to try and find that out if they can. So it becomes a real problem, and it might end up in some cases that you can't get your occupation certificate, and the only other avenue left to is to get what's called a building information certificate, or a BIC, and it's used, and only council can issue those. And council's got to consider things too when they're issuing those certificates in terms of the quality of construction of the building, in terms of structural adequacy, fire safety, all those things. So, even those things still have to be sorted out, and the building certificate it's not a certificate of compliance, it's more of a certificate of inaction to say they're not going to serve an order on you to make, repair or demolish. And you probably have those. Which is
probably what all people really want to know when they're buying a property. They just want to know that if they buy it, it doesn't have all these approvals. is council going to tell me that I have to knock it down? So at the end of the day, if that's all it comes to, I guess that's the paperwork that you need to get.
People like solicitors that are preparing, lenders that want to know that their money's safe. They all want to know that their money's safe and the policy they're issuing on the properties,
And buyers that spend, all of their hard-earned savings on buying something, they just want to be reassured that it was all done properly.
So there's a lot riding on it, and that's why we have to get it right. And I don't think that's really that information hasn't really been put out into the community well enough. Usually, when they do make changes, I think they leave it up to the industry to educate the public. And I
think it's not till it reaches crisis point that we actually have to deal with it. So I guess the point of this is not to scare people. There are options. There's always pathways and resolutions. Maybe they're expensive, maybe they're difficult, but they can be done.
They can be done.
But it's more to bring awareness to people so that if they are doing these things, just to try and avoid, a world of heartache and stress for yourself.
Yeah, don't put it off. I know, I know you're excited. The people will be excited to get into their new extension or their new house, but it's something they've really got to push through and be aware of. And sometimes I know with certain housing companies, they might not include everything in their
landscaping,
contracts.
Driveways,
retaining walls,
steps.
Yeah.
I've noticed all those sorts of things have come up.
Yeah, and then once, like we've talked about, the 5 and the 10 year time lag, if they've moved on and those other items like your retaining walls or your driveways that haven't been completed, well then the homeowner would then have to go and speak to the certifier that would have been working with the home builder to try and finalise that, and that can be difficult.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about on this topic, or you think we've sort of wrapped it up with this one?
I think we've scared people enough.
Pool compliance is another whole topic, so I think we might talk about that separately because that could be another complete conversation.
I think it is. Yeah, it is. It's a whole nother world of compliance. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much, Troy. I really appreciate you coming in today to go through all this with us. And
my pleasure.
We'll look forward to the next podcast.
Yes. Thank you.